Bathing Ghusl. Volume 1, Book 5, number 248. Narrated by Aisha. Whenever the Prophet took a bath after janaba, he started by washing his hands and then performed ablution like that for the prayer. After that he would put his fingers in water and move the roots of his hair with them, and then pour 3 handfuls of water over his head and then pour water all over his body. Volume 1, Book 5, number 249. Narrated by Maimuna, the wife of the Prophet. Allah's apostle performed ablution like that for the prayer but did not wash his feet. He washed off the discharge from his private parts and then poured water over his body. He withdrew his feet from that place, the place where he took the bath, and then washed them. And that was his way of taking the bath of janaba. Volume 1, Book 5, number 250. Narrated by Aisha. The Prophet and I used to take a bath from a single pot called Farak. Volume 1, Book 5, number 251. Narrated by Abu Salama. Aisha's brother and I went to Aisha and he asked her about the bath of the Prophet. She brought a pot containing about a sa of water and took a bath and poured it over her head, and at what time there was a screen between her and us. Volume 1, Book 5, number 252. Narrated by Abu Jafar. While I and my father were with Jabir bin Abdullah, some people asked him about taking a bath. He replied, "A sa of water is sufficient for you." A man said, "A sa is not sufficient for me." Jabir said, "A sa was sufficient for one who had more hair than you and was better than you," meaning the Prophet. And then Jabir put on his garment and led the prayer. Volume 1, Book 5, number 253. Narrated by Ibn Abbas. The Prophet and Maimuna used to take a bath from a single pot. Volume 1, Book 5, number 254. Narrated by Jubair bin Mut'im. Allah's apostle said, "As for me, I pour water 3 times on my head." And he pointed with both his hands. Volume 1, Book 5, number 255. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah. The Prophet used to pour water 3 times on his head. Volume 1, Book 5, number 256. Narrated by Abu Jafar. Jabir bin Abdullah said to me, "Your cousin, Hassan bin Muhammad bin al-Hanafiya, came to me and asked about the bath of janaba." I replied, "The Prophet uses to take 3 handfuls of water, pour them on his head and then pour more water over his body." Al-Hassan said to me, "I am a hairy man." I replied, "The Prophet had more hair than you." Volume 1, Book 5, number 257. Narrated by Maimuna. I placed water for the bath of the Prophet. He washed his hands twice or thrice and then poured water on his left hand and washed his private parts. He rubbed his hands over the earth, and cleaned them, rinsed his mouth, washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing it out, washed his face and both forearms and then poured water over his body. Then he withdrew from that place and washed his feet. Volume 1, Book 5, number 258. Narrated by Aisha. Whenever the Prophet took the bath of janaba, sexual relation or wet dream, he asked for the halab or some other scent. He used to take it in his hand, rub it first over the right side of his head and then over the left, and then rub the middle of his head with both hands. Volume 1, Book 5, number 259. Narrated by Maimuna. I placed water for the bath of the Prophet and he poured water with his right hand on his left and washed them. Then he washed his private parts and rubbed his hands on the ground, washed them with water, rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing it out, washed his face and poured water on his head. He withdrew from that place and washed his feet. A piece of cloth, towel, was given to him but he did not use it. Volume 1, Book 5, number 260. Narrated by Maimuna. The Prophet took the bath of janaba, sexual relation or wet dream. He first cleaned his private parts with his hand, and then rubbed it, that hand, on the wall, earth, and washed it. Then he performed ablution like that for the prayer, and after the bath he washed his feet. Volume 1, Book 5, number 261. Narrated by Aisha. The Prophet and I used to take a bath from a single pot of water, and our hands used to go in the pot after each other in turn. Volume 1, Book 5, number 262. Narrated by Aisha. Whenever Allah's Apostle took a bath of janaba, he washed his hands first. Volume 1, Book 5, number 263. Narrated by Aisha. The Prophet and I used to take a bath from a single pot of water after janaba. Volume 1, Book 5, number 264. Narrated by Anas bin Malik. The Prophet and one of his wives used to take a bath from a single pot of water. Shu'bah added to Anas's statement, after the janaba. Volume 1, Book 5, number 265. Narrated by Maimuna. I placed water for the bath of Allah's Apostle, and he poured water over his hands and washed him twice or thrice. Then he poured water with his right hand over his left and washed his private parts with his left hand. He rubbed his hand over the earth and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing it out. After that he washed his face, both forearms and head thrice, and then poured water over his body. He withdrew from that place and washed his feet. Volume 1, Book 5, number 266. Narrated by Maimuna bint al-Harith. I placed water for the bath of Allah's Apostle and put a screen. He poured water over his hands, and washed them once or twice. The sub-narrator added that he did not remember if she had said thrice or not. Then he poured water with his right hand over his left one and washed his private parts. He rubbed his hand over the earth or the wall and washed it. He rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing it out. He washed his face, forearms and head. He poured water over his body and then withdrew from that place and washed his feet. I presented him a piece of cloth, towel, and he pointed with his hand that he does not want it, and did not take it. Volume 1, Book 5, number 267. Narrated by Muhammad bin al-Muntathir, on the authority of his father, that he had asked Aisha about the Hadith of Ibn Umar. She said, "May Allah be merciful to Abu Abdurrahman. I used to put scent on Allah's Apostle, and he used to go round his wives, and in the morning he assumed the ihram, and the fragrance of scent was still coming out from his body." Volume 1, Book 5, number 268. Narrated by Qatada. Anas bin Malik said, the Prophet used to visit all his wives in a round, during the day and night, and they were 11 in number. I asked Anas, had the Prophet the strength for it? Anas replied, we used to say that the Prophet was given the strength of 30 men. And Sa'id said on the authority of Qatada that Anas had told him about 9 wives only, not 11.